Aside from secluding ourselves physically every once in a while from disturbances in the external world around us, situations, environments, etc. Aside from that important seclusion, what is even more important is secluding ourselves from our thoughts. Secluding ourselves from the five aggregates, the five grabbing aggregates. Pancha upadana khanda. Upadana is grabbing. Last week we talked about the Indriya Bhavana Sutta, where Lord Buddha was taking us through the 6 sense spheres. And when he got to the last one, which is the mind, which is in many ways the most important of the senses, because it grabs on to things, it grabs on to the impressions, the feelings, good, bad, neutral, memories, especially concepts, and it's like they are replaying, they're repeating perpetually. If it were an image that we saw, or a set of images, or a sound, a flavor, a taste, etc. When those senses occur, when those are happening, they happen in that moment, and they are finished in that moment. The mind grabs on, meanwhile. What does this mean to me? What does this sound really resonate with in my past experiences, for example? What does this do to me, to us? That is the job of the mind. The eye is done with, finished. Just when it happened, just like the sound and the flicking of the fingers like that, when Lord Buddha was giving the example of a sound and how fast the mind has to be there to capture that moment with mindfulness, to touch it with mindfulness. It's like the flickering of the eyes, the eyelashes coming together, the eyelids closing and opening. Was the mindfulness there? And that is a training to get us to the last of the indriyas, or the sense faculties, which is the mind. The mind itself is the hardest one to keep track of, because it's moving much faster than the eyelids opening and closing, because it privatizes those senses, those experiences, sense perceptions. It makes it our experience. It makes it mine. This is happening to me. No longer just a sensing, no longer just a seeing. The thing that was seen, that's it. It was seen. Boom, finished. The eyes, meanwhile, are looking elsewhere, seeing other things. So there is a difference between seeing and looking. The looking has a lot of intentionality behind it. And the seeing, all it needs is mindfulness. To know the difference between the two, sometimes is a lifesaver for a meditator, because it allows us to create that seclusion between our thoughts and that space that we are trying to become intimate with, to experience that spaciousness in the mind, in the heart. Because all these impressions, all these thoughts come in and want to latch on to us. And that we owe to the sankharas, to our past habitual tendencies. That are incessantly coming in. And using these different sense perceptions, an image is just an image. Even if you're looking at something supposedly repulsive, like a dead body, a corpse. It's just the result of rods and cones in the retina, just colors. If the sun just went out, all of a sudden there's no light coming in, no light source. Would we even see it? We won't see it visually, but the problem is, would the mind be seeing it still? Did it take a snapshot of it and cuddling with it? Trying to make something out of it. And that has a lot to do with the intentions that we have. And you've heard me mention the words radical attention or yoniso manasikara. That is the attention that often is misplaced. Hence it becomes ayoniso manasikara. Two terms that I came across the other day, compliments of Bhante Ñānananda, of course, post-mortem, was the word first, asati, and amanasikara, or amanasikaro. And manasikaro, or manasikara, as just mentioned earlier, is attention. And whenever we have the prefix a, it is an antonym. It changes the whole meaning to its opposite. So in that sense, it would turn into non-attention, not just wrong attention. That would be ayoniso manasikara. This is interesting because amanasikara is not giving attention. And the sati, when you put the a in front of it, changes it to not being mindful of something. Mindlessness, maybe? Ignoring would be a better term in English, I found, for this, asati. But why do I bring this up? Because remember the thoughts, secluding from those thoughts that are coming in. And in last week's simile given to us by Lord Buddha in the Indriya Bhavana Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 152, for the thoughts, he was giving us the example of an iron plate, a cauldron that has been basically on the fire for the whole day. So it's red hot. You can't even get close to it. It's hot. And then he gave us the example of a few droplets of water coming down upon this hot plate. It's so red, reddish yellow. That's how hot it is. What happens to those droplets? Chances are they won't even hit the cauldron. They won't even hit the iron plate. Because, right, even if they touch it, immediately they vaporize. That has a lot to do with the attention that we can give to whatever is happening in the mind. Yes, starting with the five senses, but especially when we get to the mind itself, which is the biggest the most powerful presence that can take us towards avidya, ignorance, or towards wisdom, panya. So I was mentioning to someone the other day how sometimes life throws things at us, difficult situations, perceptions, thoughts, or habitual memories, thoughts that keep coming up. Now, one of the worst things you could do is to become mindful of that if in the case of a person who is already anxiety prone, meaning they're easily, they can get easily caught up in the glue-like, in the claw-like grasp of these thoughts because of a habitual pattern. Earlier I was mentioning sankharas. One of the best tools to use to avoid certain thoughts that are destructive, that are negative, tendencies, etc., is to apply asati. Not sati, asati. Meaning ignoring them, looking the other way. We do this in our daily lives. Whenever you have a external, let's say you have a colleague working in the office, or something starts playing in the radio or something, or a noise from outside in the neighborhood, and you're trying to focus on something, or you're on an important call. For many of us, we will go ahead and blank out, create this white noise of ignoring that bit. But what's interesting is when it comes to our own thoughts, we entertain them. Even though many of us, if not all of us, feel discomfort from them, to the point where it can agitate the mind, even to pull you out of meditation, to that level of agitation, discomfort. So this is another form of applying sati, in fact, because it requires a certain level of wisdom to understand what's happening and immediately choosing to go ahead and switch gears and say, no, I'm going to ignore you. About, I think, 20 years ago, there was a movie, it was a remake of an old classic that was already done like maybe twice in the past. And that is from the great novel by Alexandre Dumas, the Count of Monte Cristo, the 2002 version. I think that's the latest, possibly they remade it by then, I don't know. But that was quite poignant for me because there's a scene, there's several scenes, but one scene where Edmond Dantes, the character, the protagonist, the main leading character, who is now imprisoned in the Chateau d'If, which is an island, but it's a prison for the select few that are uncomfortable for the politicians in France, etc. So they send them there because they hold too much truth in their hearts, in their minds. So they can actually really make it difficult for the leading powers that be. So he happens to be a naive person, and that's because he trusts a lot without wisdom, etc., etc. So he ends up there. And then in that movie, in that jail, he meets another prisoner. But there was a scene where in English, the movie was done in English, obviously, and it's the scene says, "So neglect becomes my ally." So somebody has carved it on the wall prior to him, and he goes ahead and again traces over those letters. So neglect becomes my ally. Neglect of what? What I'm referring to is, again, the words asati or amanasikara, what we are giving the opposite of attention to, especially in reference to our negative thoughts, our habits. We each have them, so long as we're not arahants. We need to be applying responsibility. Is this practice that I'm doing leading me to a state of calm or not? Or not? We have to be able to ask these questions and be unafraid to ask, at least from ourselves. One of the problems I observed when I first officially began to practice as a psychotherapist, especially with children. I was working at a school district and volunteer-based, etc. But I noticed how many therapists were applying or had applied already mindfulness techniques as they had learned it from books and seminars and things like that, totally disconnected from the source, which is the Dhamma, the Satipatthana. I noticed how so much was missing. But even worse, I noticed how the symptoms were getting worse and worse and worse for these individuals. But mindfulness is supposed to make a person feel at ease and comfortable, come out of the suffering, not end up in, deeper, in the deeper end of suffering. What's happening here? And I saw how there was a lack in wisdom. Obviously, there was also lack in the virtue part, because whatever was said here was not being followed through here. There was no accountability. There was no ethics, no modeling of the ethical, virtuous behavior on part of a therapist, for example, or on part of certain teachers that the patient, or in this case, the child, was seeing in their daily lives, to be inspired by, to be moved by, and say, maybe I don't need to get angry or hurt my classmates, etc. So sila was missing, but most importantly, wisdom was missing. Even though there were some mindfulness-based techniques here and there, like watching the breath or sensations of the body, which on their own, they really mean nothing. In fact, they could even make the symptoms become worse, as I was mentioning. Now, how? Why would they get worse, first of all? Because when we are putting the awareness, the mindfulness, the attention on something that is painful, it turns into a magnifying glass as you're holding it and capturing the radiation from the sun as you are about to start a fire. And that is what was happening. Because suddenly this person, who initially, when they began breathing, for example, or become aware of their sensations, etc., suddenly they would feel even their heart rate would start racing. And they become extremely hypervigilant, hypersensitive to whatever was taking place. And now the little bit of fear or anger or frustration or anxiety that they had started with has now become a mountain. So many people were running away from this mindfulness technique altogether. The patients, they were like, we don't want to do it. And then you had the other camp of individuals, the other extreme, where the person would just completely zone out and fall asleep. That was their way out, not to feel the anxiety. In either case, something had to be done. So there was a need for joining of all these three different trainings together. And then the changes began to happen. All it took, it was a few sessions, and all of a sudden, the person's symptoms were gone. Yes, in our line of work, in any type of health services, we're not supposed to say cure or heal. You won't see those words. It's legally, people had gone in and changed those words. We use the word treat. Very politically correct. So the Buddha's teaching, the purpose of his dissemination of the Dhamma was to heal, was to cure the disease called dukkha. Not treat it. We don't treat symptoms in the Dhamma. We're after healing, cure, period. And then I started seeing these kids healing. Why? Because they were following a system. So there were moments where they had to encounter their mindfulness was sharpened enough for them to detect their negative thoughts encroaching upon the mind, invading that space that they were feeling good in. For the first time, the child was smiling, for example, or feeling happy, or becoming less and less surly and angry and cantankerous. They were just being more and more amicable. But every once in a while, the negative thoughts, the memories would come in. At that moment, with responsibility, the person began to apply neglect towards paying attention to those negative thoughts, negative tendencies. Slowly, slowly, that muscle became stronger. And now they were inviting wholesome thoughts. And this is, in essence, applying the four aspects of the right effort, samma vayama, where the person understands the presence of something that is destructive and unwholesome. So you stop it. You put a border, impassable one, and then you remove whatever that has arisen. So you're completely shutting the access for future arising of such thoughts. And then you're introducing the positive one, the positive, the opposite of such a thought from arising. And whatever was arisen, you're actually cultivating that wholesome quality in the mind. So it's a gradual process. You've heard me say that again and again and again. But sometimes we tend to forget the importance of us to pay some attention sooner or later to your own goodness. Every once in a while, you come across statements by Lord Buddha in the discourses, in the suttas. You see it starting from the Anguttara Nikaya, in the Book of the Ones, where he says, Pabhassara midang bhikkave chittang, which means luminously radiant is the heart, bhikkhus. The mind is luminously radiant, he says. But, he adds, the corruptions of the mind come in, encroaching, and they obscure it. They obscure it. In many instances, Lord Buddha talks about radiances, luminosity. He uses the examples of the moon and the sun, fire. You see that in the Book of Fours, in the Anguttara Nikaya, where it says there's four kinds of radiances. He says there's the radiance of the sun, the radiance of the moon, the radiance of fire, And then he says there's also the radiance of wisdom. Radiance of wisdom of the heart, the mind. And he says, out of all these four, the foremost, the greatest, is the radiance of wisdom, because the other ones can be temporary, can be covered up, can be obscured. But once a person experiences the luminosity and takes care of it by always checking out to see those obscurations that keep trying to infiltrate the mind, the more we see those and become cognizant of them, the more we take on the responsibility to appreciate and give value to that seclusion between ourselves and those droplets that keep falling on the cauldron, red hot cauldron, and allow those thoughts to immediately vaporize instantaneously. Now, this is an art form. This takes a lot of effort on our part. This takes a lot of effort, energy, and awareness to apply wisdom, to know what to give attention to and what not to give attention to, that is. Because there is a tendency in all of us at one point or another where we want things to just go smoothly, smooth sailing, where we don't have to work as hard. I mean, sometimes we get lucky. We have those pockets, air pockets, if you will, where things feel right, but we're dealing with incalculable lifetimes of sankharas also that will come and try to, well, steal the show, as it were. At that point, we need to remember the radiance of the heart and not take things too seriously. So what I'm suggesting here is to be able to apply all the tools whenever the time is appropriate for them. Having that toolbox with us is really important. But not to carry them with us to the point where it's like the image of tying both our shoelaces together, both feet together. We won't be able to advance. We won't be able to even walk or stand, let alone walk. This is important because oftentimes we mystify, I don't know even if the term is right, but spiritualize, quote unquote, the practice to a point where it becomes less and less pragmatic, less and less real, less and less human, and more something that is projected, something that is constructed. Another form of papancha, in essence. But life is always going to come through and knock on your door, your windows, your walls, trying to get in. So I'm trying to share here some thoughts that are things that all of us encounter at one point or another in our lives. At one point or another. And secluding ourselves from the khandhas in that sense, where we're identifying, okay, that is feeling, that is perception, that is the sankhara, that is the habitual pattern, the tendency. And that was sense awareness that started it all. Feeling of good, feeling of bad, feeling something neutral. How did I feel it? I felt it with this body. Okay. So slowly, slowly things begin to come apart. The jig is up, slowly, slowly. So there is no one size fits all for each of us, because we're each of us having a different course of progress, a different set of sankharas we have to deal with. By the way, another word for sankhara, other than habitual patterns or formations or preparations or fabrications, is makeup. Makeup. You know, actors would use makeup in ancient times, even before they went on to do a play. So the makeup itself would also be called sankhara. So what do you use a makeup for? To cover something up with, to present something other than what it is taking place. So it is not genuine. So whenever the sankharas are here, that's where the heart's radiance is being blocked off, obscured, corrupted, if you will, upakilesa. So if we can become more aware of the sankharas in that fashion, in that sense, and this is where Lord Buddha was telling, informing, instructing Bahya. Bahya, when seeing, there is no I, myself who's seeing. There isn't that I'm seeing. There is just a scene. When sensing, feeling, tasting, hearing, there's just that thing being sensed, felt, without the additional factor of something. In this case, the makeup, which is completely tinged by past experiences. That's what it's coming from. And there's tons and tons of emotions wrapped up, knotted into that sankhara. So it comes in and completely overlaps, covers up whatever's happening, and we can't even see our own radiance, the radiance of the mind, which is why we're practicing to be able to see that more and more and more. And because of that radiance, we have the potential to become arahants to begin with. That's why my insistence for us to go back to our goodness when things feel like, it's not working out. Remember your goodness. Think about the virtues. Think about your generosity. All those are fingers pointing back to the radiance of the mind. But for all of us who are not arahants, those are covered up with obscurations, with defilements. They're simply not allowing us to see the sun behind these dark clouds. I know I'm using a lot of similes, but or images. As you know, that's the most powerful way of learning and understanding, especially something as beautiful and delicate as the Dhamma. So those are some of the thoughts that I want to share with you today, and hopefully we'll have more. This way we can have some more time with questions you might have regarding the practice, regarding the Dhamma, because I hear from different students, different issues they're having in practice, this and that, and questions coming up. And so I wanted to present a multifaceted way of approaching a better understanding of the Dhamma as far as your own practice is concerned. I know each of you are on a different path, a different phase or process, in the stage rather, yeah, stage in your progress. But essentially, this encapsulates all responsibly approaching what we give attention to and what not, what we shouldn't, in this case, asati. So next time you see something, you feel something, you notice something about yourself, instead of really tormenting yourself or getting into the performer mode, that's another thing we do. Get into this performance mode, like I have to achieve this. Even the word that we use, like so-and-so achieved arahantship, achieved nibbana. So we need to check our own lexicon, what words we use also, because there's usually a heavy-duty, compact, but nevertheless powerful, dense feeling behind such words, which can come and impose itself into our own practice. So pulling ourselves away from that and just saying, you know what, every time I'm going to sit, I'm going to start from scratch. I don't know anything. Oftentimes I say that. I really don't know anything when it comes to the Dhamma. When I'm thinking about this and this and this, yeah, you know, but ultimately, it's just jargon. So long as it is dissociated from reality. Just like that child who was trying to practice the mindfulness of the breath or sensations, and they felt comfortable to break away from reality into the pseudo-reality. Because sometimes, if not many times with meditators, they can sit, we can sit for hours, and then what really happened during those 1 or 2 hours? Really? Yeah, you can give yourself a pat on the back. I sat for 2 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours, yay. But really, what was that all about? Has the mind reached really consciously, with awareness, with wisdom, a level of depth? Were you able to encounter the sankharas and see them for what they are? Did you notice how many times the attention was going somewhere that you did not want it to go? And what happened next? So we're doing surgery in that sense, yes. And we're not always looking for the really quiet, jhanic absorption type solitude, because that can easily go into just lethargy. I've had people who would say, oh, I was in neither perception nor non-perception, right, Bhante? No, you were just lazy. You were dozing off. Plain and simple. I know, I hate to burst your bubbles, but that's what it was. So having ownership, having a responsible attitude, that's what I mean, ownership, of our living experience, and then putting a droplet of Dhamma here and there, and that's it. You don't need much. You don't need to know the suttas. You don't need to, memorize so much. I mentioned Venerable Chulapantaka, the younger brother of Mahapantaka, who was an arahant already. Chulapantaka was the one who was looked at as the dumb one. His brother would call him dumb. All the Sangha were calling him because he could not even memorize a single verse. And Lord Buddha approaches him because he sees that the whole Sangha was invited to go to this lunch to the next day. But they intentionally excluded Chulapantaka because he was just an embarrassment to both his brother and the whole Sangha. And they, in fact, wanted him out of the Sangha because he wasn't smart, he wasn't wise in any way, even though he was very, very humble. And Lord Buddha approaches him and he gives him, some commentators say he creates this foot rag, white foot rag. As bhikkhus, we have foot rags sometimes given to us, and so when you go pindapada, in those days, many bhikkhus would walk barefoot. So when you would come in, the people would wash your feet, and then you would use this, or you would do it if you're in the monastery. So anyhow, Lord Buddha, seeing from afar how Chulapantaka was in tears, he was crying because he might have been, without that much of an intellectual prowess, shall we say, or wisdom, but that did not stop him from being a human being, because he felt, he knew his own brother was turning him away, just pushing him away, and everybody was, well, he got neglected, he got left behind, abandoned. So in pain, he was in tears, he was crying, and Lord Buddha sees him from afar and he approaches him. He hands him this foot rag and he says, Chulapantaka, take this and hold it between your thumb and your index. And the words in Pali are Rajo Haranang, Rajo Haranang, which means something like, even this piece of cloth is prone to getting dirty. Even though it was crisp, white, the Buddha just gave it to him. And as he's crying, as he's rubbing, and the commentaries also said something like, in his previous life, he was part of royalty. So whenever it got hot, he would just take the cloth that was in his hand, silk or whatever, as a royal person, he would just wipe his forehead with it. So as he's doing this, he takes the rag, the foot rag, and he puts it, and he wipes his forehead from the sweat. And meanwhile, he's still going at it, rubbing, 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 Rajo Haranang, Rajo Haranang, Rajo Haranang, and then he sees that this crisp white piece of cloth had turned dirty. And there he penetrates into the Four Noble Truths. He sees the three marks of existence. He was no longer holding a beautiful piece of white cloth. He was holding a dirty piece of rag. That was dukkha. That was also anicca. But this was beyond clean or dirty, which was anatta. He saw what he was including in it from his own mind, his own attitude, his own attachments. Suddenly he pierced through and he became an arahant. So, yeah, I don't know where that, what tangent that brought us to, but it just showed up. So I hope that was useful. So anyhow, I'll pause now and see if there are any questions.
Bhante, thank you for your story. Your last comment about Chula, what's his name, brings up to me the question, I wonder what the Buddha, what activity he'd give to me.
What would you what would you feel he would give you, Greg? Go with the first impression that comes to mind.
It would need to break through the ignorance. I don't know. I can't figure it out.
Hmm.
If I knew, I'd already do it.
Obviously, I wouldn't know what Lord Buddha would give. But I'm presuming would be something along the lines of whatever we have a strong feeling towards, strong attachment towards. Because my sense is he was looking at even the words, Mahapantaka, which means great, Pantaka, and Chula Pantaka means small or short, the little one. So it's, it's like a polarity there. Similarly with the foot rag, clean, pristine color. It's completely without any blemishes, nothing, no dirt, no smudges. And look at this. I'm always going to be dirty. I'm always going to be nothing compared to my brother over there, who is an arahant, who goes in and out of the fourth jhana, and he knows exactly how each jhana unfolds into the other, knows exactly how long he could sit in the fourth jhana and when to come out. So he was very meticulous with that, the older brother. And he would teach people, but who am I? I'm nothing. So I have a feeling that Lord Buddha saw that polarity in his mind, the constant comparison, which is obviously coming from a point of conceit. Conceit in Buddhism is of three sorts, three aspects. One is, you are better than me. We are equal to each other. And you are lower than me. I am higher than you. So superiority conceit, and there's also inferiority conceit and just conceit. Compare and contrast, I like to say. So when that is the hottest emotion, the hottest feeling that he has, or what he is, in this case, Chula Pantaka, is caught up in, that is the narrative, the worldview that he has, the paradigm, then I see as to why the choice was. Plus the fact that he couldn't memorize anything. None of the verses, he was able, verses from the Dhammapada. So those two words, somehow Lord Buddha knew that he would be able to catch on to. Rajo Haranam, Rajo Haranam, Rajo Haranam, Rajo Haranam. And that became almost like a mantra. But that was like a sidewinded or something like on the side. What was more important is something that kinesthetically he could relate to. Because obviously it seems like as an educator, you would look and, every one of us has a different capacity or learning capacity. We have a different modality of approach that speaks to us best. So he happens to be, and it's amazing how Lord Buddha is demonstrating to us, for us, that he knew about learning methodologies, the differences. He knew about tactile and kinesthetic type of learners there. And Chula Pantaka was one. And then you have others who sit and hear one verse, like Venerable Sariputta, hear it. So they are on a higher level of understanding and as it regards to intellect and abstract ideas. When Venerable Assaji was giving a few verses about the teaching, because Upatissa at the time, before he became Sariputta, asked him, who is your teacher? Tell me, Bhante, who is your teacher? He says, I just recently joined the order, he says, but I cannot fathom being able to tell you the Dhamma that my teacher teaches. But he says, I'm very good at capturing things. This is Upatissa, Venerable Sariputta. He says, I'm very good at capturing things. Try me, give me something, give me a short, brief instruction, and that'll be good. And he says, okay, whatever has a cause, whatever came about as a, as a result of causes, my teacher has explained its origin, meaning the conditionality of them, where they came from. Whatever exists, my teacher has explained their conditionality, their causes. But he says it in 4 verses, and then he also says about their ending, their cessation. But those 2 other lines were not enough, were not necessary for Venerable Sariputta, because he became a Sotapanna just from those 2 short lines. Just like Chulapantaka became an Arahant, actually, he went straight through very quickly. Sotapanna, Sakadagami, Anagami, boom, Arahant, very quickly. It does happen, so you don't have to go months or years, decades in one stage. So the learning capacities and the learning methods that best suit an individual, Lord Buddha knew about. So, and piggybacking off of those, coming back to you, I would say, if you know your best way of understanding concepts, learning theories, perhaps intellectual, conceptual, methodical way of compartmentalize things, this has to fit here, this has to fit here, in this place, etc. The cohesion of all these concepts, perhaps Lord Buddha would have gone into that route to teach you something. Perhaps. Again, these are all assumptions. So I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I'm a visual learner, so maybe he would have shown me a picture of some sort, diagram.
Oh, yes.
When you talk about all the compartments, I need how they all fit together.
There was a jeweler in the past, and a bhikkhu who had become a bhikkhu. I'm sorry, but he was a jeweler in his lay life, and so he appreciated beauty, making jewelry. It's very intricate. I used to be a jeweler growing up. I apprenticed and did all those years of apprenticing, learning how to make it. But if you go to India, especially when you look at jewelry made in those days, even to this day, it's far more intricate. And there's so many, curves and reliefs, and it's very intricate work than anything I had learned how to make. But this person is having an issue with his practice. And his practice is not going anywhere because he's fighting. It feels like he's crawling through the holy life with his tooth and nails, as it were. And he's even becoming discouraged enough to even want to leave because he feels that he's no good for the holy life. This is not helping. In fact, he might actually be embarrassing the community with his lack of concentration, wisdom, etc. Lord Buddha sees this with his mind, and he approaches, he calls him over. And Lord Buddha holds a lotus. In this case, it was a lotus. And he shows it to him, and he says, Bhikkhu, practice meditating on this flower. And just like in the case of Chulapantaka, who was using tactile perception, in this case, it becomes a visual learning apparatus, an object. And the bhikkhu becomes an arahant. Because he appreciated, Lord Buddha knew in his mind that this bhikkhu knows beauty. Knows beauty. And he resonates well with beauty. And he just gave him a fresh lotus, which, by the way, it started wilting in time, as you can imagine. And you see impermanence coming in right through the door. As he's looking at the beauty of this flower, he's like, oh, look at this. It's so gorgeous. It's like beautiful. Oh, Well, wait a minute. Why is it going? Why? All of these play out. And the mind now starts seeing through visual perceptions things that were very difficult for him to grasp intellectually. So that would be another one. Well, I guess we covered three of them, three of the senses. Let's go with the sound. One time, I remember this because it's a poignant, it's a beautiful sutta, but also because I recently translated it from the Anguttara Nikaya. It's Sona Sutta from the Book of Sixes. So you have Venerable Sona, he's in, so Lord Buddha is, they're both in Rajagha, in the city of Rajagha or Rajgir. It's a beautiful place if you go one day. I hope one day we'll, my goal is to have a pilgrimage at least once, maybe go with students perhaps, meditators. That would be wonderful, I think. Anyhow, I digress. So Rajgir, Vulture's Peak, if you've ever heard of it or come across it in the suttas, it's at the top of one of these beautiful, magnificent cliffs. And on the way up to Vulture's Peak, you come across a few caves. One belongs to Venerable Ananda, the other one belonged to Venerable Sariputta, because they wanted to be close to Lord Buddha. And Lord Buddha had his own kuti on top at Vulture's Peak. You could see the tracing of it. So below the cliff, below where Lord Buddha was staying, was where Venerable Sona's kuti was. And he was struggling. He was struggling, pushing and shoving in his mind, trying to make mindfulness work for him, putting a lot of energy, burning himself out, to the point where he also had the thought, I come from a wealthy family, so I got wealth, I got money. I haven't lost much, even though I've spent some time in robes. This is not working out, so might as well just go back to my lay life. My family, my brothers, sisters will accept me. I will get my money back and my share, and I can just go on living a lay life. So I got that covered. So this is not working. At that moment, Lord Buddha's observing his mind. And he shows up in front of him. And as the texts say, just like a strong man with flexed arm just would stretch out his arm, and then, or a stretched out arm, he would just flex back that quickly. He just shows up in front of him. And Lord Buddha asks him, Sona, were you thinking about these things? And he says, yes, Bhante. I feel like this is not working for me. The holy life, I'm not good for it. It's like I'm an embarrassment. And he says, Sona, you used to be a very good musician, weren't you? And he says, yes, Bhante. He says, you used to play the veena. Veena is like a sitar, but the Indian musical instrument. It makes quite a beautiful sound. And he says, yes, Bhante, I used to play the veena before becoming a bhikkhu. As bhikkhu, we don't play instruments or sing or dance, So Lord Buddha asks him, when you had a string that was too loose, would it play that tone, the tune? And Sona says, no, Bhante, it wouldn't play. How about if it was too tight? He says, that too. He says, it'll snap or it won't play the right tune. He says, just like that. Your mind. You're going to two extremes. Either you're completely slacking off, or you are putting too much effort where you're about to snap. You're too tight. The craving is so strong. The energy factor is so strong. It's not giving time. It's not giving a time of day for the mind to rest. to come into samadhi. You're too sharp. It's like, when we were kids, we would sharpen a pencil. I loved it when it came out of the sharpener and it was so sharp, and I would just go like, yeah, I'm gonna make sure it's not gonna break. Poof, it would go. We all know what that feels like, what that looks like. And the pencil would go from this to, meanwhile, we can't even write a single sentence on a page. So similarly, he was pushing too much, too fast, too hard, and completely missing the point. So, and then after giving him that instruction, Lord Buddha goes, disappears, and Sona says, well, Lord Buddha came in and personally to teach me this, and I'm going to do it. And he puts his effort in the right manner, with the right calibration, if you will, the balance. Like we've talked about the seesaw of the 7 factors of awakening. That could be an image you could use. And he becomes an arahant, using the metaphor of a sound, because he was a master at sound as a musician. So Lord Buddha used this tool for him. And as far as the body goes, texture-wise, or you could say mental in this case, yeah. Nandaka, I think it was, right? His name, Nandaka, his cousin, who was very much pulled into the sensual world, because the day of his marriage, the wedding day, as Lord Buddha is passing through his kingdom, because he was a prince, he was a crown prince, his cousin, and he just was, it's arranged marriage. He was just going to marry this most beautiful woman, he says, in the world. He sees her, but he just says, nah, I'm becoming a bhikkhu. So he renounces, he goes into homelessness. So he doesn't even touch her physically, Meanwhile, he's sitting and meditating for some time, and constantly her face shows up, her body, her etc. And he feels like this is not working. I'm constantly thinking of carnal or sexual things and sensual things. And Lord Buddha says, come with me. So he takes him to, he grabs hold of Lord Buddha's robe, and the texts say he went to the Tavatimsa heaven, and he showed him all these nymphs and these beings. And he's so inspired, as far as inspired, I use it loosely here, moved with his lust, so much like, wow, my wife doesn't even hold a candle in her beauty to these ones. And he says, so you're saying if I work, I continue my meditation, and I practice my concentration well, I'm going to be reborn in this realm and basically enjoy all this? And Lord Buddha says, yeah. But he was functioning from such a low level of sensual lust. So that was the only thin thread that could be used with him. He was not prepared for something loftier. He couldn't understand wisdom. He was like, so even lust can be used as a method at some point by a master teacher who understands wisdom and understands the heart of the student. And now he goes and starts meditating carefully. But his fellow bhikkhus know why he's meditating. It's not pure. And they even mock him. They say, oh, there he goes. There's Venerable Nandaka. He's sitting there. He's actually practicing to go to his nymphs, to his beauties, whatever. He gets so insulted. He's like, he knows it's true. And now he struggles even harder, but not for that cause, but for the cause of understanding the true reason why people go from a home life into homelessness, to taste the ultimate fruit of nobility. And with the practice of satipatthana, he pierces through and he becomes an arahant. And then he goes to Lord Buddha and he says, Bhante, I know I made you promise me that if I practice well, I'm going to be reborn in those realms. Please, Bhante, I don't want to hold you to that promise, because, and Lord Buddha saw him, basically saw that he was an arahant. And he says, Nandaka, the moment that you attained to the ultimate fruit of liberation, you released me from that promise. Because there's no way that an arahant is going to be reborn in any of those realms, any realm, any of the three worlds. So I just wanted to include that in there because it felt apt. So anyhow, I hope they're helpful. Yes, Lou, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Bhante. I have a question. Can everybody and you hear me well?
Oh, yes. I think so. Yeah, I hear you. I think we all do.
Oh, good. One question. This is related to, for example, for me, it's not so, let's say, so challenging, the thoughts. But
the thoughts,
I can notice, you know, if they are wholesome or unwholesome, and they take an action about that moment or that situation. But what I find very challenging is connecting to feelings and sensitivity, especially when I am facing pain or suffering, or dear ones that are struggling, you know. So, and then there is this returns to my present moment, you know. If I share some time with one of these persons, or even an animal that has been wounded, or even you know, hit by a hunter or something like that, these kind of situations really move me, and I try to act, I try to help, but it remains this kind of the experience, you know, and maybe if these beings are still suffering or struggling or in sickness, you know, because there could be a process in those experiences. So although I try to apply, you know, anicca, right, that are conditions, but still I can connect to those kind of pains and sufferings. Any recommendations or any highlights, please?
Yes. Even though the Brahma Viharas are tools that we are encouraged to use, encouraged by Lord Buddha, and one of them, the key beginning, or the first of which happens to be metta, which is what you practice, can, if not applied wisely, can go into pity or affection. Affection. That's one of the reasons why we stay away from, let's say, somebody that we are, or of the opposite sex, or somebody that we are physically attracted to send or radiate metta to, because that metta can easily turn into affection, and even can turn into sexual attraction. So this is something that people don't talk about, but this is there. So there needs to be wisdom from the start. And when I say start, every time you sit, obviously from the start of the practice, when you get introduced to it, but every time you sit, every time you're taking your spiritual friend into your heart, understand what it is that you're doing. Remember the sankharas I was mentioning earlier. They come to cloud everything, including the Dhamma. That's why you have so many different schools of Dhamma that showed up. Within 100 years, there were 18 different schools of Sangha. How is that possible? Well, because of people not practicing what Lord Buddha taught. They were always adding something. And 300 years later, you even had Abhidhamma show up. Okay? Things were added. Now, you don't have to go into historical things. We see this in our lives. So I'm going to use the example you gave from yours about animals or people. And please play into this the portion, the context, the contextual important presence of your background, your religious background, your cultural background, the Judeo-Christian background that we come from, usually in the West. That can play a huge part in this, because it can easily turn metta from the way Lord Buddha described it into something, let's say, that you might have seen or understood or practiced or taught from the, let's say, Christian perspective. And that's why you have, I shake my head when I see sometimes very, big names in the Buddhist world talking that Buddhism and Christianity are the same thing. Complete nonsense. Okay, otherwise the Buddha would have never taught. We shouldn't be even talking about Buddhism then if it's the same thing. Why then go through the trouble of learning Buddhism? That was enough then. So people don't think beyond their own egos. And we call them, enlightened beings, but such a bombastic claim as Buddhism and Christianity or the other religions are the same is just ludicrous. But the person needs to understand this in their own life. In this example, using this example of metta, being not the same as sympathy or as pity or as affection, because these are counterparts. These are the enemies, if you will, because they will take you from where metta was going to take you, which is to upekkha, to they will take you into more feeling attached, feeling more grief. Because, in Christian culture, for example, there's a lot of like the guilt, the feeling of pain, crying. How many saints have you seen in any of the churches, pictures or depictions where they're smiling widely, happy, telling a joke or something? You don't see that. Well, the Buddha would say, we are the happy ones. Okay, that happiness, yes, it stems from metta, but it exudes its way all the way to upekkha, which is a much higher and deeper state of being. Without upekkha, there cannot be awakening, by the way. That's why the criticism that metta has gotten over the years, especially in the commentaries, is towards those people who practice metta and stay in the level of just the emotionality of metta and never develop deeper into understanding, compassion, for example, the karuna, and then which will take them continuously all the way to upekkha, which is not indifference, There's a depth to it. So, because when you are reaching out for the dog, to help the dog, to or an animal that is in pain or suffering, Buddhism is not going to tell you, don't do that. It will tell you, While you're doing that, check your mind, check your objective. Is there the attachment that, oh my God, I want to save you? I have to save you. And if I don't save you, all hell's going to break loose and I'm going to lose my appetite. I'm going to be affected and I'm going to go and beat down somebody who hit this animal. A few weeks ago, as you know, I started my personal retreat for a few weeks. The day I started, the neighbors decided to, well, there were also wild pigs going around. Where I live, there's animals. And a day earlier, I had taken a video of this animal that came in and started to eat together, father, mother, and a baby piglet. Wild, but they're not boars, you know, they're not like really wild boars. That could be dangerous. They're just pigs, wild pigs, black. And so I was just enjoying them from my window. I don't live in a monastery, again, so I have to find the means to pay for rent where I'm staying because I don't have the ability to live, to be offered that space of a monastic life or the support. So I have to live with other people close by, neighbors. Unfortunately, the neighbor decides to, the following day, which was the day that I started my retreat, to pull out his bow and arrow and shoot one of these pigs. Now I'm sitting in meditation in the morning, the following day, and suddenly there is this loud squealing. An animal that is in pain. The dogs in the neighborhood started barking. And it was so loud that I had to get out of my sit and see. And then I see the neighbor actually picking up the body of the animal and pulling him to do whatever. Of course, sankharas are there. They're going to come in. So my objective was to immediately jump into my mind and see what I really can do, because the animal is now dead with 2 arrows into its body. So immediately I also actually was sending metta to the energy flow of the being, wishing for it to attain a higher rebirth. And for also the piglet and the other parent, I didn't see whether it was the mother. Hopefully it wasn't the mother because the piglet was still nursing. I mean, it was getting milk from its mother. So hopefully it was, in that sense, hopefully. But I don't know what, which parent was. But I was hoping that they would be safe and they would not return the next day, etc. So the priority there was, other than contacting the individuals involved, saying this is totally unacceptable, plus there's a bhikkhu living here in the same premises, come on, have at least some level of consideration. Different story. But basically coming to my part in this, as a person who witnessed this, was to come back to the upekkha. Now, was I numb? Was I neutral? Was I? Absolutely not. But I could have easily gone overboard. Easily. At the very least, I could have imploded within me. I could have created havoc and so much agony and torture in my mind, constantly replaying the squealing, the crying of the animal for help. All of these things, I could have done that. Or bringing up hatred towards that neighbor. All of this in the mind of a Putujjana might be justified, maybe. But we cannot allow that in the mind of a meditator. So, and then be able to have the capacity to continuously send the metta all around without having preferences. So you see the higher level of approach when it comes to loving kindness that Lord Buddha was teaching us, because every step of the way, I gave you this very personal example that recently happened, so you can see the different nuances of how the Dhamma can penetrate different aspects, layers, and facets of our lives, where we can't say, oh, no, 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 Dhamma is not something historical in the text, something I can't relate to, something that I have to do guesswork on. No, you can bring it, apply it, taste its fruits now, and see how it changes the quality of your life now. And as you're doing that, suddenly wisdom occurs. Suddenly you penetrate a wall that you couldn't. How is this addressing your question? Do you feel like it's addressing your question? Well,
yes, probably the difficulty is, I guess, is with practice, of course, but how to move towards upekkha in those situations, how to, with the loving kindness, with the metta, and also the caring, if it's necessary, or if an action can be taken, and how to bring or include, or let's say strengthen the upekkha. I guess maybe it's by practice or by.
Well, yeah, saying that it is by practice, it makes it very vague. It leaves it out, almost like it'll happen when it happens, type of a thing.
Exactly.
That's not Dhamma, as far as I understand it. Always use a neutral object, meaning take yourself, your mind, attention, let's say, from whatever the hot scene, the difficult situation is, that's pulling your attention away from you like a black hole. Pull that and bring your attention back to something neutral, usually the body. Right now, can you feel the scarf around your neck? You feel it. Is there a difference between the front part of your scarf touching your skin, if it is, the sides, the right and the left, or right or left, and the back? Is there a difference in the way or the pressure? You can tell the difference.
Yes, certainly.
Okay. Guess what? You brought your attention to a neutral object. Now, I didn't choose the breath, if you notice, because if you are looking at something that is very aggravating, agitating, chances are it has affected your bodies, specifically the body sankhara, which happens to be the breath. Okay?
Yes.
So we don't use the breath at that moment, because if you're watching a beautiful sunset, your breathing is going to be much calmer, chances are. But if you're watching an animal being hit, struck by something, by a bad intentioned person, guess what? You're breathing already, your heart is racing. So to use the breath at that moment would be like those children trying to do mindfulness when they are very angry. Now their anger is going to go even higher. So you need to bring it back to a neutral object. In this case, I chose the scarf around your neck. It could be something else. It's up to you. You could be, but basically all having to do with the body. Because it can, I don't recommend using something conceptual, thinking, intellect. No, that's not it. Even anicca that you said, oh, this is anicca, that can be concept. Meanwhile, you're feeling something in your body. Your body is connected with your subconscious mind. Okay, that is the biggest part of your processing mental processing. It's far greater and superior to your cognitive mind. It always be the boss of your cognitive mind, generally speaking. So your body is directly connected to that. So you saying anicca, 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 it's not going to have any effect on the powerful subconscious mind which is dominating the body. But if you bring your attention to your neutral object, both conscious and or cognitive mind or conscious mind or executive mind and the subconscious mind, now both are paying attention. What are you doing? The scarf. Oh, okay. Well, this is. See, they both put down their arms, their weapons. So you don't have this fighting now inside of you. So you came to the neutral object, and from that neutral object, the mind, as you are progressing in your practice, you're coming closer and closer, or have already experienced upekkha, suddenly it drops into upekkha and it feels, oh, okay. So you don't walk to upekkha. We don't do that because we can't do that. It's like somebody saying, Bhante, I want to now practice after metta, I want to take myself into karuna, and then to mudita, and then I want to push myself into upekkha.
No.
It's impossible. They will unfold one into the other. They will flow into one another. It's like the streams of cold, water that's melting in the upper Himalayas, slowly start to become bigger streams, and then rivulets, and then rivers, and then massive rivers, and then flow into the ocean. So they flow into each other, inevitably. So that is how upekkha, but using the neutral object is key, so long as it's not mental.
Yes.
So does that help?
Oh, yes.
Okay,
yes.
good.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Any other thoughts or comments or questions? I know we covered a lot today, but I hope it was useful. I get inspired by the stories, and that's why I like to share them with you. They're not supposed to be left in, or collecting dust in some book. These were real human beings like you and I, who experienced difficulties, who experienced pain, whether it was Venerable Sona, whether it was Venerable Chulapantaka or Nandaka, all these people, and many, many more. So use their examples as much as you can, so you can pull yourself out of this isolated mental way of looking at your life as being so unique, so singular in its difficulties. It's not. Hate to burst the bubble, but it's not. Especially when you look at others who have had more difficulties. And we're still talking only about the human realm here, which is still like heaven compared to a lower realm. Like that dog that was hit, or the pig, or the mother monkey who has the baby in her arms, and a group of chimpanzees attack so that they could grab hold of the baby as she's trying to struggle to fight them, to pull them away from the baby, and she can't help but she has to run away, and the baby is being torn apart, eaten. Animals live in constant fear. Even a tiger, a Bengal or Siberian tiger, which is at the top of the food chain, we think, it still is afraid. So is an insect. So is a snake. Even one of the most powerful snakes, a black mamba or a king cobra, is still cautious. That's always fear, and it's always keeping the mind agitated. And chances are most of these animals that I listed now, a snake, a tiger, a lion, an eagle, etc., they are bound to be stuck in that realm for a long time because they always eat and kill in order for their sustenance to be there. Versus another animal that doesn't. A caterpillar or a butterfly or a bee, they have a better chance to move up the ladder. But we are here. So there's what I'm trying to say is there are far worse realms than us. Even though what we're going through now, especially as human beings, is very, very difficult. Perhaps it's unprecedented. Perhaps it's never happened before. This much havoc and misery around the world at the same time, globally. I don't know if ever it has happened. But now we're going through this hard time, but there's always other beings who are in a far worse state than us. And I haven't even talked about the petas and the hell realm dwellers. So let us look at the positives. At least I can sit, I can actually 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I can practice metta and feel at ease. Whew. So let us appreciate those about being, having, and also having encountered the Dhamma. That's the biggest gift, I think. So,
Thanks very much, Bhante.
yes, go ahead, Upatissa.
Okay, it appears to me that as long as we are not arahants, it's definitely much easier to generate karuna towards the prey and the prosecuted than to not generate vyapada or ill will towards the predator or the aggressor. But it also appears to me that it's both are very important aspects. And if we, the Dhamma actually teaches us that the aggressor and both the aggressor and the predator will one day converge to the path of, for example, the pig and the pig which is being hunted.
Mm-hmm.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, there was an echo in your voice, so I was trying to pay close attention. I think I got the gist of what you're saying as far as the sending of metta to the prey who was just killed versus directing
not
vyapada.
Generating vyapada.
Yeah, and not generating vyapada or ill will or hatred or anger towards the perpetrator, the aggressor. Yes, but that also has a lot to do with the level of the person who is either generating or in this case sending the hatred or radiating hatred. And so not everyone is going to be doing the same thing. I will also say that there will be different gradations, levels of either one, vyapada or metta in this case, or ahimsa in this case. Ahimsa is the non-violence part. Now, having said that, most people are going to have both. Most people. Now, it is important to become aware of what you just said. Okay, it's easier for me to, let's say, send metta, but there's also these hidden agendas that happen in the mind, meaning there might be a subtle amount, subtle mask coming to cover up the vyapada, and it might be a mountain of vyapada, anger, resentment, but the person is saying, no, biting their tongue, biting their teeth together and saying, no, I'm going to give metta. I'm going to completely ignore what I'm feeling, this anger, this resentment, this hatred. So there is that also. Even though it might be the person has gotten used to just sending loving kindness mentally. It's just like a person who says, anicca, 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 anicca. So, or the person can truly feel comfortable just sending the metta easily. But we're talking about a person who is on a higher level of their practice, on their progress. But there is also disgust. If there is presence of panya or wisdom, in either case, it's like last week's Lord Buddha, when he was talking in the Indriya Bhavana Sutta, he was saying how to be able to see the pleasant in the unpleasant immediately for one who is gone beyond the training, meaning an arahant. So an arahant, I'm presuming here, would be able to look at, let's say, this animal who was shot and the person who is shooting. And he would be neutral, or she would be neutral towards both, as the arahant would see what has happened. And they would see, because they also would have the three knowledges, second of which is the ability to see where beings come from and where beings are going to. Meaning he would see the pig that just got killed, and he would know where the pig is going. And he would also know what this action committed by this human being, perpetrator, is going to take him or her to. Because, so there's different levels. So we can't just say it comes naturally or easier to generate metta towards the prey. Yes, that does happen for sometimes, versus the vyapada being sent. But there's a lot of sankhara playing in the background of the practitioner as well. Maybe that would trigger old traumas in this person, even a noble disciple, that could turn them into vyapada, or at least turn them into severe pain. They hold it in their hearts now, the pain, because there is an absence or lack of mindfulness. The difference between the arahant and everyone else is the difference in having the mindfulness and the clarity of vision, to be able to see beyond this animal being a pig who just got killed and the human being. Because the arahant might also be able to see the pig was not a pig always. He used to be an archer. He used to kill other beings, animals, and now he got hit by another archer's arrow. So the arahant might also be able to see that. But yeah, it's, if the person has practiced, having said all those things, if they have practiced enough metta genuinely, and they're able to catch hold, it's like those droplets, every time they hit, they vaporize in the mind. So the person is not holding on to the thoughts, to the memory of something good or bad, then they're able to be sharp enough to see all this happen and then bring them back to the upekkha, which was the message that Lord Buddha was saying all the time. Because ultimately that is what matters the most, because there's this interplay of drama and all these things. People are ultimately the inheritors, the carvers, the sculptors of their own karma. Both the archer, both the pig, us, it's just karma. That's the inheritance we have. So that upekkha will allow the further understanding of what that means in the grand scheme of things. Because we're not here to save beings, ultimately. We're here to stop suffering and to cut ourselves from the suffering. As we do that, to help others as well. That is one way of saving, the only way that I know from the Dhamma to be applicable to the verb saving someone. And this carries over to the societal understanding of, oh, we have to go and protect the prey versus the predator. Well, what if the predator, the lion that's coming and eating, is hungry and has 2-3 cubs to feed? But we don't know about that. We just see the deer being chased by this lion and eaten. So we forget to look at the whole context. So the arahant is able to see the whole contextual structure behind everything, which comes thanks to the supreme level of upekkha that they would have. That would be something that I would add to what you said, Upatissa. What do you feel about that?
Yes, perfectly.
So there's different levels, absolutely. But again, to wisdom. I mean, every day I realize different level of what Lord Buddha meant by this path being all about wisdom. Because we like to put things in boxes and say, I got it, this is it, this is it, this is the Dhamma, and then the rug is pulled from under us. Because now we see a new level of wisdom that, we didn't notice. But use your own life as the perfect example for it. You don't need anything else. A few droplets of Dhamma into your life reveals everything. So, thank you for your contributions, all of you. Wonderful questions. So let us share some merits. May suffering ones be suffering free and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief and may all beings find health relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of wholesome happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power share in these merits of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you be well. May the triple gems blessings be upon you and your loved ones. May you stay safe, be protected. And I'll see you next week where we will do a sutta. I think it will be the Devadhuta Sutta, the divine messengers. I'll switch gears a little bit and hopefully it'll be an enjoyable one for everyone. Yes, you're welcome, Peggy. See a message. So be well and I'll see you next week. Take care. Sukhi Hotu.